Welcome to another edition of Living with Purpose. Today I have a very special guest, Atul Tandon, who is the CEO of Opportunity International. But Atul comes in with enormous background, having worked in the financial sector at Citibank, then going to World Vision, and now at Opportunity International. And we'll talk about his journey through these various phases in life and the contributions that he's made and the importance of purpose. So, Atul, welcome to Living with Purpose. So, let's talk a little bit about your initial journey.
Thank you, Akhtar. Now, you and I are both Indians, so my long answer to that question would probably take the entire podcast. So I'll keep it short. Born in India, born actually in Delhi. And for those of your listeners who are either Delhiites or Indians, I was born in the old city in Daryaganj. And you can't get any more Delhi than Daryaganj.
Wow.
And born literally in our case at that time in my family in a two-room tenement home. And, grew up with that. My father never owned up there like many of our beginnings of people in my vintage in India. He never owned anything more than a bicycle till the day he passed away. And, and here we are. And that's been sort of my own journey of being born into that milieu. But really, experiencing just from probably my day one, a family that had tremendous love and tremendous faith and the confidence that in our case, my brother and I would do well, that we would not survive, that we would thrive. And I think my mother, probably more than anybody else, drove that and brought her entire family, extended family, as probably is the case with many people who grew up in my context, is we are the products of a community. We're never individuals. We grew up together. We leaned on each other, those who got it put around us. And they are the ones who provided really the impetus to do well. And that's been the case. So to whom much is given, much is expected from. And, that led up to a desire to not to compete, but to succeed at education first and then at my career. And, I must have had some spirit of adventure and some rebellion in me after from when I was born, because I decided against the wishes of my parents to go to the marketplace. So literally in my family of many, many generations, I'm the first person to seek a career in the marketplace. Went to University of Delhi, did an MBA from there. And then at that time, started, I didn't know it at that time, decided that I'd like to set up my own company. In my case, it was a financial services company that a friend of mine had been thinking about and planning to start. So we got together and started there.
What year was this?
This would have been after initial, trained by a couple of companies short. This would have been 1983, 84.
This was very early, right?
Very early. Yeah, you're very right. Corporate sector was principally owned by a group of large families. And if you wanted to do anything, or multinationals. And so this was very, very, very early. I have to tell you the story is when we went to register our company, we went in an auto rickshaw. We didn't have very much. And I was wearing a pair of sandals. Unlike the suits that we all wear today, and walked to the registrar's office to set up this company. After he didn't know what to do. So he had not experienced two guys who were probably kids in his eyes wanting to set up a new company. So it was we didn't know any different. So we did that. And that then led to a career initially in startups and then discovering really, in my case at that time, if you wanted to achieve success and scale, for me, it felt like it was right to do it from within large corporations. So got the opportunity to join Citibank's initial team in India to set up the consumer bank in India.
So before we kind of move forward, I just want to go back to your childhood and talk a little bit about your schooling. Where did you go to school, right? So you're born in Daryaganj. Did you go to a missionary school, a private school, a government school? Talk a little bit about that and how did that influence going to Delhi University? It's not easy to get into Delhi U. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, it's the schooling is interesting. two parts. One, I went, most of my schooling was done in a very remote part of the country. My father at that time was working in a very remote small town, which was a port town, called Kandla Port. It's huge now, but at that time it was literally the back of beyond. The only way to get there was a train journey from Delhi, which would take about, I think, if I remember right, 3 days and 2 nights. And I started, initially I was living with my grandparents, and then went to school with my parents in Kandla, moved there. And my mother had this insight. She said, well, she was a school teacher herself. Our public school was right across the home from where we lived, but the public school had only education training in Hindi and in the local language, in Gujarati. She said, well, no, for my kids to do well, they need to go to what she called an English medium school, right? So this is a foresight of a mother who is an Hindi teacher herself, right? She said, no, I got to send my kids to an English medium school because that's the way to success. Well, the only English medium school was about over an hour bus ride from our home. And it was run by Carmelite sisters.
Yeah.
Mount Carmel High School. It is celebrating its 60th anniversary this year, which I hope to join later this year. And I think I was the second batch of that school. She convinced the sisters that her 2 sons should join that school. And even though we didn't live in the neighborhood of the school, we would get on a bus and go there. And that's what we did. Get up early in the morning and take a state transport bus and go there, an hour ride to the school, get educated, do the school day, and come back home in the evening. So my mother's other condition, what got me to Delhi University, it's after you ask questions that take me back in my mind to many years, is what she could afford to give us as presents every year at the start of the school year. We're talking about the school year starting in August, was simply a box of, in my case, a box of number 2 pencils. Yellow lead number 2 pencils with a sharpener and an eraser. And she gave it with the expectation that I would use those pencils well.
Yeah.
And it wasn't simply an expectation. It was, in her mind, a condition to be met. And I think it's my mom and those number 2 pencils and my mother's high bar that she set. And clearly the sacrifice she had to do to get us to school, financially and otherwise, that really provided for me, even till today, I can say, Akhtar, the very lasting drive, not to succeed because she expected, because that is what is the right thing to do. She believed in me. She invested in me as my family did. And my job was to get on with it. And today, we continue to do that with opportunities clients, is to give them a hand up. Somebody gave me a hand up. Here we are. And that number 2 pencil was, literally, I remember working 14, 16, 18 hours a day. Our family life was, okay, open book and insert face. That was the only thing you're expected to do. So, not for today's upbringing, but that was a different time, which led to Delhi, which led to the business school, and then on to city, and here we are.
So let me, just for our listeners, right, this notion of sacrifice that happens, and then the ability for certain individuals to grab onto that sacrifice and see the reason behind the number 2 pencil and open a book, face in the book. Or not everybody can do that. So I'm glad that you kind of brought that out as a force that actually molded you. That's really what created you. So here you are with Citibank. You land up in America. Where did you land up?
Well, that's what Citi actually, interestingly, I'll take you back. They recruited me in India.
Yeah.
I was put up there I was part of the initial team to now launch Citi's consumer banking operations in India. They were not that there weren't retail banks in India, but there weren't very many banks that were really focused on understanding the customer first and developing solutions to meet their needs. And this is in the 80s, after this is not in the 2010s and the 20s.
Right.
India was probably, like many of the countries we work in today, a country with a large population, but a very small part had tremendous wealth, and everybody else was principally living below the poverty line, the vast majority of India. So this was an approach by Citi, and I would say, to the credit of John Reed, who I think is probably one of the foremost visionary bankers in our times, if not, in the history of modern banking. was that, well, if I start to make small amounts of money, $1 a day from 1 billion people, I'll have $1 billion profit operation. And let's figure out how to get that done. Part of that approach was to get to India, completely contrarian at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Those were heady days. I got to, as a young professional, head up a team that we brought everything from ATMs to India. We introduced credit cards in India. We had into consumer credit in India, the first really TV loan. And, you think these things are passé today. They weren't in the 80s. In fact, the policy and the regulatory frameworks didn't exist for, things that we just take for granted today. So it really was quite a heady time to bring all of that. And it ended up being just a wonderful team of people. And I think that's one of the principal lessons I learned in that time, was that when you really put a group of very smart, dedicated people to what could be an impossible task, but believe in them, give them the support, and then give them the capacity, competency to work effectively with each other, they create just amazing things. Get out of their way and let them innovate and let them invent, let them be the best they can be. They do amazing things. And that's what then led to Citi's success in India. That whole team, I'd say, continued to for a while. And then, this is what happens, I think, even today in the best of corporate America. Some genius in New York City decided, well, you know how to start a business and how to turn that into a profitable one. Let's see if you can turn around a failing business. So that's what brought me to the US. Was a small group of people in Citi assembled to help turn around our California operations, which this is the time of the SNL crisis. We're losing the money hand over fist. How do you stop the bleeding and then start the march up the profit ladder? So we came to the US, and this was in 92 with Citi in the California region. And, some of your listeners will remember Rodney King and the fires burning and the LA riots and things like that. And I got to see that. So here I am from, one of the fastest growing businesses in the world for Citi, down to where now I'm seeing really, a community sort of unravel itself and how to put it back together. It was a great experience. It took about 3 to 4 years, but it really was a formative experience in my time. And I'm frankly, even today, tremendously grateful to Citi and to my teams at that time, both in India and then California and elsewhere, to give me the, frankly, the permission to learn and then to grow, both individually and then to help them to grow and to change. So it really was a great time.
So you were based in LA?
I was initially LA and then San Francisco.
Yeah. But the LA piece is kind of interesting because, that's what you're doing, right? I mean, in some ways, you started off building communities and banking and financial acumen being the foundation for building communities and building whatever. Wealth is not the right word, because we basically think about wealth as billionaires, but we are basically talking about individuals having access to credit so that they can actually get onto their...
Yeah.
So in some ways, LA at that time, with inner city LA, was very similar to what you were trying to do in India.
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah, in some ways it is that we're dealing with, specifically in the California, the Western region was where you were extending credit to people who have a hard time earning the incomes that are necessary, right? To not service the credit, but to actually do the kinds of work that will allow them to build their income and wealth.
Right.
We use credit as a key part of it, which that whole ecosystem had kind of part of the reason why I think these turmoil sort of things happen in economic lives of people, which then end up in the social lives of people, is at the heart is the inability of a family, and usually is a family, to be able to have enough sufficient income to feed itself, to have a roof over their head, and to provide what the family sees as a good future for their children. Find ways that when you find that your local economic and social, if you will, circumstances do not allow you to do that, that's what leads to tensions and conflicts. At the very, very heart is this sort of enigma of how do you solve and address after this economic and social need that we have as individuals. And it's not to become the next sort of billionaires. It really at the heart is, okay, how do I feed myself? my family? How do I provide for a good future for my children? How do I sleep well at night in a safe and secure environment? How do I grow up to get up in the morning and I'm welcomed by my neighbors, right? And I find an environment that I can do good work. Those very essential human conditions, when we meet them at scale, this is what you call thriving communities.
So here you are, right? So you are focused on creating thriving communities through a banking financial system.
Mhm.
And at what point did you decide that you needed a change? How did World Vision come into play as part of that change?
Yeah. Well, this is, you going back now in time, and I was about as I entering my 40s, this was still at Citi. I was now the head of the global branch distribution director, very leadership position in Citi's global team, doing well from a career perspective. I had a personal, pretty serious health crisis. And coming out of that health crisis, as I was recovering, I faced a question that in my case, I have to believe that God asked that question as a person of faith. What brings me deep joy and satisfaction? What is my purpose in life? What am I here for? And the answer, Akhtar, that still guides me even today, now 25 years later, this came after much prayer and much thought, that was helping others succeed where they are. So in my case, to go back to my heart was with the people I had left behind, where I'd grown up. And a desire to see them, to use what I had learned, the skills, the networks over the many years, to put those to use, to help those people not to follow the path I had followed, but to follow the paths that they have to economic and social well-being. So they can get, just like I had been able to leave behind, and my family today, not simply a financially stable life, but a thriving life. How do you see more people follow that path? And that health crisis and that prayer and that really the deep question, what brings me the deepest joy and satisfaction? What is my purpose in life? And that purpose then becoming clear in serving others is why I do what I do today.
So for our listeners, where many of them may not necessarily know what World Vision is, could you just share a little bit about that and your work, and then what you do today at Opportunity International, which I find just absolutely fascinating?
Thank you. Well, so that was my first job out of, when I left Citi, I told myself what I've learned over all these years, which, what do I know to do? I know how to take ideas from inception into reality, put them to deploy them right from the inception, turn them into reality, and then deliver that reality at massive scale. That's what, really, in many ways, my career has taught me how to do. How do you do that in the nonprofit world? It was the question I asked myself. And then the question becomes really, when you look at the world of nonprofits, in the developing world and in the developed world, there are two sort of constraining things that hold them back. One is, where will the funding come from? Because the funding models are largely philanthropic, if you will. So how do you now get, how do you raise and scale up massively your philanthropic funding on the one side? That's one of the biggest constraints that nonprofits face. The other then is equally on the work side, the beneficiary and the client side. How do you scale that work? How do you go from having not 20,000 clients, 50,000 clients, but 5 million clients? How do you go from 5 million to 50 million? How do you do that? These are questions that the corporate world answers. But in the nonprofit world, where there is no corporate, there is no capital, there is no shareholders, there isn't a profit motive, how do you answer those questions? Turns out that the skills of organizing work are still the same in both. The need for talent is still the same in both. To organize that talent is still the same in both. To have, we might call it business strategy, but it's really enterprise strategy. Having, a very disciplined approach to enterprise strategy, a disciplined approach to enterprise, to taking that strategy and developing a plan and action, and then implementing it. Those are very similar. The difference is that the lack of capital, if you will, constraints and resources of all kinds, people and capital and time, constrains the nonprofit sector. So I said, okay, I think if I can help the sector solve that problem, that'll be a good use of my time. And that led to World Vision, which is an international relief and development corporation, organization, nonprofit. It's a faith-based one. It's a Christian relief and development organization based in Seattle. And I decided to join them. They had just at that time got a CEO from the commercial sector. Rich Stearns continues to be a very close friend of mine. You know, Rich in the Seattle area. And he and I kind of got together. We became, two peas in the pod to say, okay, how do we take at that time what was a nascent nonprofit and massively grow it? And then how do we grow both the donor side and then how do we grow the beneficiary side? It took about 9 to 10 years, but that's what happened. We went from about $335 million in revenue for the U.S. arm to about $1.5 billion. Globally, we went from about $500 million of revenue to over $3 billion. And equally on the work side, expanded into relief, expanded into development, from delivering beneficiary services to really designing entire communities and ecosystems, financial ecosystems, education ecosystems, health ecosystems. It became even today is one of the largest, if you will, nonprofits working in the humanitarian development and relief space. So my job there was to say, well, the one thing you need first, it is resources, which is talent and money. If you can get those two, then the problems of addressing the needs of the world will take care of themselves. Because when you have the funding available and the people, they'll put their heads together and figure out whether it's HIV/AIDS, whether it's a massive earthquake, whether it's a huge famine, how to solve those, how to bring the right people and the right resources. I don't have to be an expert. My job. So that's what I did for World Vision, Akhtar, is really help them both deepen and diversify their funding sources. First in the US and then in about 25 countries around the world.
What an amazing impact, right? I mean, it's you were talking in terms of hundreds of millions of people that have actually been, lives that have got changed, right? And positive change in small communities, remote locations that have actually been given the power to succeed. And now you're at Opportunity International, which is really doing some very innovative work back into your banking financial sector. So you kind of come a full circle. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, it's only in half in jest. I laugh at myself when I look in the mirror. It's okay. I banked the rich of the world. I banked the middle classes of the world. In fact, started banking the middle classes before, where they were what we recognize as middle class in most of the emerging markets. And today I bank the poor of the world.
Yeah.
And I have to say that the one that is the hardest to do is the last. And I'm so glad I waited till now to do it. But it's also the most satisfying is the banking the poor is the hardest of the three to do.
Right.
The reason is both the cost of servicing them is very high and also the returns are very low. So cost is...
The small sector doesn't go into it.
It doesn't go into it. That's why, because the returns is, how do you do it? And that's what Opportunity International focuses on and has for 54 years, is how do you get the poorest families on the planet to have the means to earn sustainable livelihoods and get out of poverty. And to do that, you essentially, in some ways, you need three things. You need, which are true for all of us, frankly, if you think about them, are you need the right skills to whether you're running a business or you're doing a job to earn a living. You need the support. In my case, I had the support of my family and then my school and my work community. So we need the support of each other around us. And we need financial capital. So Opportunity strives to make sure that the people we serve have all three. We help them build the skills. We help garner the local support. And then either we, but now increasingly actually, and I'll talk more about that, work with local banks to provide them the financial services they need, credit, insurance, deposits, transaction banking, what have you. So they have all three, if you will, packaged and delivered to them at their doorstep. Because we fundamentally believe you have to help people where they are, not ask them to move from one place to the other, but to help them where they are. And those are the three things we do at Opportunity Does. The key that we have learned, and we started by doing this, and our journey actually very, very illustrative of how, as people groups, we have gotten better, not just Opportunity, but all of us have gotten better at addressing, endemic issues, is Opportunity started by giving one-on-one loans and one-on-one support and skill building. Our founder, Al Whitaker, literally found our first loan client, Carlos Moreno, sitting on the street in Cali, Colombia, selling raw spices. And Al's a businessman based in Washington, D.C., working for Bristol Myers. Asked Carlos, what do you need to do better in life, earn more money? Carlos says, I need a spice grinder. He knew exactly what he needed. Why? Because ground spices fetch more better prices than raw spices. I can't afford it. I don't have the capital. All right, I'll give you a loan. How much does the spice grinder cost? This is in Cali, Colombia. Carlos puts an astronomical number of $68. And Al has the insight to say, well, I'm not going to give you the $68. I'm going to loan you the $68. Why? Because now you are accountable to me to make sure you're paying the loan back, that you're actually running a business well.
Right.
But I won't leave you by yourself to run the business. I'm going to ask a local friend of mine to come collect the repayment every week and to chat about how your business is going. Right? Very simple. One-on-one resource. And that one loan and one client, Carlos took that $68. 2 years later, he's no longer on the street. He's got a store with about 10 employees. 10 years later, the guy's got 5 stores, 50 plus employees, and he sells it and becomes a consultant with opportunity to help others to follow the same path he had followed. But from that one client, opportunity then understood, well, 1:1 is not good. We should do 1:many. So we, came up with the model of trust groups. What if we were to give group loans instead of individual loans? And, it's better to give loans to women than to men. They seem to do better at organizing themselves and paying back and supporting each other. So those modalities over a period of time after have now led to where we operate in 30 plus countries. I have the great privilege of now leading a network, 30 plus countries. And this is what we ended with last year. In those countries, there are about 9 million loan clients. About 12 million are savings banks. And then in addition to that, literally thousands of schools that we have helped finance, tens of millions of children are going to those schools. And now our latest venture is pharmacies and clinics on the health front. So it's been quite the journey for this organization to go from one to many. And in that process, figure out the tremendous power of networks, partners, and really, if you will, taking advantage of what I call the principles of leverage. So, and I can get into some of that, but it's really been quite the journey. And, I get to play a role in it. So there isn't a better way to spend time.
This has been so fascinating. I know you have a hard stop being run out of time, but let me just, for our listeners, what Atul is doing is really not focused on charity. What he's focused on is meeting people where they are, providing them with the financial support and the acumen needed to thrive. And if you bring these 3 things together, you are now creating a flywheel, like Amazon has created a flywheel, which actually continues to push people out of poverty, and they are then pushing other people up out of poverty. So, Atul, this is just such a fantastic way to kind of encapsulate what you've been doing. So let's get you to talk a little bit about the importance of purpose and your one golden nugget.
I have to say that my parents provided me purpose.
Yeah.
They showed very early on, that you have to have a purpose in life, right? And specifically my mother, my purpose early in life was to do well at school. As I grew up in life and I saw teams come together, whether it was in my early career as a startup and then into Citibank and now in the nonprofit world, what I've discovered is finding very talented people. We do our work best when we get a group of people together with a defined purpose, a defined passion, right? And I would add the third P of driven by principles.
Yeah.
When we bring those 3 things together, just amazing things happen. When you bring people together with a purpose which they're passionate about, and then organize ourselves in a very principled way to act, then amazing things happen. And there's hardly anything that you can do to hold those people back from achieving remarkable. I've seen that again and again, whether it was going to school, whether it was, a small team in City launching consumer loans, or another team turning around filling out part of the bank, or launching a response to HIV/AIDS in Africa. Today, the work of bringing millions and millions of people credit in their homes and making sure that our 200 bank partners can provide credit to schools, to families, to clinics, and others to help them build a life for themselves. The other thing I found, and I would not take personal credit for it, but all credit to Jim Collins, You mentioned the flywheel. Is Jim was and is a proponent of disciplined thinking. And I would say what I've learned is disciplined thinking followed by disciplined action. The disciplined planning, disciplined action is what it takes to succeed. I would add two things more that my life, especially working with some of the poorest people on the planet, has taught me, which I don't think I would have got otherwise. And I can tell you story out of story of their lives of that. One is to celebrate exuberantly. When you achieve something, celebrate as a team, as a group of people. And, there's a reason why when I go into a village in the depths of Malawi, in a small, there's no town, there's no road. We've driven 2.5 hours over some dirt track. And I met with a group of women dressed in all their finery and dancing, right, and singing. They're celebrating. So exuberant celebration is what I would add. The other is constant forgiveness. Forgive each other, invest in each other, look out for each other, because that's what all we have in our lives is each other. If there's one purpose in life that I've learned after is to invest in others, is to serve others, is to love others. If you were to do that, the world would be a different place. And frankly, I will challenge you and your listeners to think back on their lives, not only on their lives, that of their families, their communities, their societies. The times in our lives that were marked by loving each other, serving those around us, are the times that we remember the most, are the times when our families, our communities, our societies did well. When we get into conflict, conflict reduces the opportunity for everybody. It is investing in others, in appreciating others, loving each other, which maximizes opportunity for everybody. So that's been sort of my personal passion, and I hope that becomes the passion for many others.
That's such a fantastic way to end, right? That exuberance and forgiveness.
Amen to that.
If you can live with those two, that then creates joy and allows everyone to show up with authenticity. Atul, this has been such a fantastic conversation. Again, to our listeners, purpose is that renewable source of energy that continues to drive humanity forward. You've learned some new things here. Exuberance, kindness, forgiveness. Until next time, thank you all very much. Thank you very much, Atul.
Thank you so much, Akhtar. And till the next time, indeed, all the best. Bye for now.